Just before I begin, I'm going to talk about the citizen in the digital media world, not necessarily obviously from a device perspective in terms of the technology of devices, nor from a legal perspective, but I think some of what we've heard in certainly TJ's presentation, I think has such major implications for what we do. So as Sandra mentioned, we are the national public service media organisation in Ireland, and as such we have an obligation to meet the needs of all of the people in Ireland and Irish people, because there is a global Irish obligation on us as well. So it's all cohorts, all demographics, all communities. And you know what's been happening over the last few years has been just so incredibly interesting and challenging for us as a public service media organisation and as a player in the media space, which is crazy. That's all I can describe it as. So just in terms of, let's start with what's really important, and that is the audiences and what's happening with those audiences. Well, never before, ever, has the citizen or has the individual had so much choice with regard to what, when, how they can listen, watch, read. It is, and that is just increasing dramatically. The growth is exponential, and that is about, you know, the providers of services out there, not just in terms of the sources of content, but also the delivery channels of that content. And that is bringing all kinds of, I believe, challenges with regard to how you manage information, how you can validate or credit information, not, you know, leaving even aside some of the stuff that TJ was talking about with regard to how you actually protect both the citizen and the information and the source and the ownership and the copyright of that information. But, you know, on the face of it, it's fantastic for consumers. They can do whatever they want, whenever they want. And, you know, traditionally, you had to tune in at a certain time to get your favourite show. Those rules are completely gone. And that's really challenging for organisations like RTE, because there is, you know, there's an economic model that we have to try to deliver to make sure that we can invest in content and that that content has a return so that we can therefore fund even more content. But as I said, from an individual's perspective, it's fantastic. In terms of how I would, if you like, try to describe what's happening with the consumer today, they are bombarded, they're obsessed, they're incredibly engaged with content and to a degree with each other. You know, they're constantly on their phone or their mobile, etc. But I would say to a degree that actually, you know, while they are being bombarded, it's voluntary. So I believe that they are more in control than they ever have been. And what is happening as a result of that is that the likes of the big TV operators, the Skies and the UPCs of this world, are now trying to move into, if you like, the telephone business. So they're trying to add more and more services and make their services more attractive. And then the telcos are trying to move into the television market. So they are trying to increase the number of services. And from a consumer perspective, the benefit of this has been you get much more value for money, because, you know, back in the day where you'd never changed your bank, you never changed your TV provider, or you didn't change your utility provider, that's all gone. Now you can shop around and you're getting more and more value, you're getting more services, and you're getting them at a much lower cost. So to a degree, the power of the big companies, it's not gone by any stretch of the imagination, but it has changed. And I believe that they have to now listen to the consumer and really try to service them more. So I believe that the monopoly, to a degree, has been challenged. From the perspective of being a broadcaster or a radio, big radio, TV broadcaster like ourselves, we've had to really work very hard to try and make sure that, we are actually treating our consumers and our audiences as customers, because we can't just expect them to show up. So that's been, I believe, forcing organizations like ourselves to be much more consumer focused, as opposed to just a kind of one-way broadcaster of content. Interestingly enough, the consumer is just, they've also turned the tables on what is content. So, when I say they're obsessed, they're kind of obsessed with themselves. So, you're seeing so much more consumers, citizens putting themselves as the center of the story. It's not just that they can access professionally created content, but actually they're making the stories. And look, there's all kinds of potential issues down the road. People say, well, 10 years from now, will you regret making, putting your child's life online on Facebook or whatever? Who knows? But I wouldn't try to overthink this too much, but there are issues. There's big discussions in Congress in the US at the moment with regard to, for example, the data collection that's happening within the schools and what's happening to that. So we need to protect, but realize that to a degree, some of this has been voluntary. So, I would ask the question, does the consumer have the tools to really, navigate, understand, validate the content, or the companies or the organizations that they are engaging with and if you like, giving their data to? It is what it is. We have to try to find ways to mitigate some of this, but we also have to teach children how to manage information, etc. Social media has just been the most phenomenal change in what we do, not because it has offered the citizen opportunity to interact and create and publish content, but because it is now the starting point in a lot of cases for seeking of information. So for example, it's not necessarily about going necessarily to the homepage of a news organization anymore. It's actually about what you see in your news feed, whether that's has been put there by friends, or whether that is actually being selected by some of the social media organizations, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. Consumer constantly engaging, constantly talking, constantly interacting. They've gone from this, the traditional establishment of media, to always on, always, to, constantly getting your content from God only knows what source, but really trying to almost like multitask, as well as content that's coming from non-media organizations. But we've all signed up to so many push notifications, and our footprint, our location, everything is out there. But there are upsides. So, for example, you can watch your GAA matches around the world now, which is not something that you could have done before. And this is a service that we launched last summer. We've just launched a international player, which is the first time we've been able to get a really broad Irish content service out there from a television perspective. So the citizen is global within communities. It's not about necessarily always geographical footprints, but it's actually potentially about like-minded communities and cohorts. So with all this noise and the clutter and the fact that the definition of a media organization has changed, there's so many brands out there that are now in the content business that are redefining themselves as media organizations because they have such reach. how does a media organization remain relevant and, make sure that we do develop a relationship with the consumer, because that's absolutely key to our survival. For us, it's been about really better understanding the motivations and the needs of our audience, both in terms of what and when. 70% of our audience is now on mobile. That has changed everything. And it's not just about, mobile is a small TV. It's not. It's a completely different device. People want to engage differently. They want to, be able to parse their information differently. We're also seeing so many different patterns of behavior amongst different cohorts. So it's not a case of that we can say, people have moved to they're now all watching online, or they're now all watching on demand, or it's now all mobile. We even see within the mobile range of devices completely different patterns of behavior. And you talk to 14-year-olds now, they're not on Facebook anymore. They're on Snapchat. So what are the 8-year-olds, going to be, how are they going to be accessing their content? And it's really important for us to really understand that. So that, as I said, we're meeting their needs. We're not actually trying to control them. We're trying to be relevant to them. And the way in which we're doing it is great content that's core to what we do. And great content is, what resonates. And great products. So product development and an always-on development approach for us is really key to building our relevance and to making sure that, we really work on the audience discovery piece. So that's key. A lot of content out there. How do you ensure that people can actually find what's right for them? So a big issue, I suppose, really is the whole trust part of, or element of what we do. The latest Edelman Trust Barometer has suggested that trust is actually, it's declining for NGOs, for business and for media, and government is even lower than those. So trust is a really big issue. So Facebook have recently announced that they want to be in the news business. They are in discussion with a number of news providers to embed news into Facebook. So the question we would ask there is, who gets to decide what, if you like, the priority or what type of news stories are pushed? Facebook, as an example, and I think they're a fantastic company, they've got 1.4 billion users. They have the best set of data in the world because they know who you are, what you watch, and who your friends are. So, who gets to decide, I suppose, in terms of, what are the priorities? Is that now Facebook? Are they going to decide what's right for you in terms of the news story? And that's, that is a big challenge, I believe. While our obligations are to meet the needs of all audiences, we also have an obligation to be fair and impartial and balanced, and that is the role of public service media. And I think that, what we're seeing out there in terms of all this great choice and the availability of content, it's actually really important that you do have, that level of, or the presence of public service media within the marketplace. Because it's not always the story that you want to read or watch that enriches your life. Sometimes you need to know things that maybe you wouldn't necessarily have voluntarily, gone to read, or that your friends might have shared with you. And that is, that's the crux of public service. With regard to, how we really feel that how we really feel we can engage with consumers, and what is really, if you like, benefiting and attractive to consumers is that whole idea of community, whether that's geographical or whether that's in terms of the interests and relationships that consumers have. We're about bringing delivering content that brings them closer to home. So, for example, I mentioned GA Go. It's a really interesting case study with in partnership with the GA last year, which is, for those of you not from Ireland, is the Gaelic Athletic Association, we delivered a service that made the games available live around the world. We're a small country. We have actually, in a global sense, we've got very niche content. So technology has been a wonderful way for us to actually distribute Irish content and to target a very specific group of people. So we made the games available on a streaming basis. They had never been to the degree that available before. It was very much a pubs and clubs model. So we launched in May, and what was really interesting for us is the feedback we were getting and the case studies we've been able to build out of it has been, for example, for Irish people to be able to introduce their children to the games. You know, I mentioned it was pubs and clubs. That's not necessarily where you bring kids, but we have seen so many wonderful examples of young fans throughout the US, you know, throughout Australia, various different markets that are now part of a national community, an Irish community, which is really important, as well as being able to enable, for example, the guy on the right there is 85 years old. He left Ireland in the 50s, and he is now, you know, able to watch his national game, and I think that that's really important. So we ended up with fans. This is after 4 months of being live. People watching, buying games in 157 countries, and that was just a phenomenal success for us and for the GA. We also have, you know, wonderful national events like the Rose of Tralee, and we've been able to make those available around the world. And again, you know, through social media and through our online distribution, we have been able to make sure that everybody is engaged in this, and that, you know, we can, you know, we're able to feed the water cooler to a degree. But we've also, you know, even domestically with things like, for example, comedy shows that, you know, if you just did things on a linear basis, they wouldn't even be in the top 15 yet amongst certain cohorts with our, you know, available online. They're really, really tracking and making a difference. And again, I mentioned the player, really good example. And I'm putting this up because I like this slide. Last weekend, we had about 800,000 people watch the Irish match. We had 200,000 watching online, both live and following that on demand. That is phenomenal. We had 500,000 people, you know, follow our tracker. We literally do a move-by-move brand tracker. It's in text on our sports site. 500,000 people using it. Unbelievable. So we had, you know, we were able to really feed through both through social media, through our online site, through mobile, as well as on TV, to really make sure that we're meeting the needs of, you know, for this, obviously, for last weekend, it was a very broad range of people, but we really felt, you know, we were able to meet their needs. So that's the approach that, you know, we're taking. In terms of the future, I think it is for organisations like ourselves to ensure that we are meeting that obligation of meeting the needs of our audiences and of all the different cohorts out there. It's about innovating, investing, listening to them, talking to them, engaging with them, and really trying to make sure that, you know, we're future-proofing our organisation so that we continue that relevance. Because, as I said, you know, in terms of independence and excellence, it's really important that, you know, we really fulfil that, and that's not necessarily the way it's been done today. It's all going to change. So that's where RTE is coming from.